In the previous stadium tutorials we demonstrated how to create the advertising hoarding, the glass walls and all the railings. In this third part we're going to look at how to create a bespoke seating style for the stadium. If we look at the finished style we can see that the chairs attach to a continuous rail with regularly spaced supports. Though the final result looks complex, none of the individual components are difficult to construct. To create this effect we'll use a composite style comprising of 3 generators controlled by a single spline. So we'll get started by going to ITOOSoftware and creating a new RailClone Pro object. Come over to Modify, go into the Style Editor and create a new linear generator. Create a spline and a single segment. We'll wire the spline to the spline input and the segment to the default input. Now for the spline, ultimately we're going to use the splines that run around the seating in the scene, but while we're creating the style we're going to use a smaller section over here to the left of the stadium so that we can just concentrate on a small section. So if we pick that spline from the scene, and for segments pick this long stretch of rail here called chair rail. Now all these segments have had their pivots aligned so that when they're snapped together using the same pivot point it should all line up correctly. In order for that to happen we need to just change the alignment of the pivot point down here. So click on the segment, come to alignment, and for the Y change it to pivot, and for the Z do the same. And we'll do that for all of the different segments we use in this style. So now if we look at this we can see into the end of the rail, so we want to cap that off. To do that we'll copy this segment to save setting up the pivots every time. So right click on the segment, go to copy, and then right click and paste. And then pick the end cap, which is just there from the scene, and wire this to the start input. So that goes on the end there. And we want to do the same on the other side. We've only got one end cap, so in order to reuse it we'll mirror that one. So drag a mirror node in, connect this to the mirror and the mirror to the end. And you should see now we've got an end cap there too. If we get in close we can see there's a slight gap there, so it'll be at both ends. So if we just change the padding on the left and right to something like minus 0.002, it should just pull that together a little bit. So in the next step we'll add the supports that bolt the rail down onto the stand. And to do that we'll use another L1S generator, clone one of these segments again to make sure the pivot points are the same. And this time we're going to wire this to the evenly input. So pick from the scene the support here and use the existing spline and connect that to the new linear array. Now we can see those evenly spaced. We can change that spacing by clicking on the new array, going to rules and going to the evenly distance, and you can adjust it from here. About a meter or 0.9 is probably correct. Of course when you're using an evenly measurement you don't get one at the start or the end, so we also want to add one of these uprights to the start and the end of the array. And finally we'll add the chairs themselves. So we'll do that with a new linear array, the third one, again connected to the same spline. Clone one of the segments, and again connected to the evenly input. And pick one of the 2 chairs from the scene. There are 2 here, there's one with the seats down and there's one with the seats up. Since we're going to create a stadium which has an audience, we'll use the seat down position. But if you're creating an empty stadium you could use the seat up. So there we go, let's just change the display mode so we can see it a little clearer. So I'm just going to change it, since we're using a small section, I'm going to change it to mesh. There we go. And if we come now into the evenly distance again, so come to the new array, go to rules and evenly distance, we want to bring that distance down so that they come together, and actually 0.43 is the measurement I used. We want to turn off justify this so that it doesn't equalize the start and the end. And of course just like with the supports there's not a chair at the start of this array either, so we also want to take this chair and wire it into the start input of the linear array. And what you're going to get then is an overlapping chair because they're using different pivot points. When this is wired into the start, it's using the left hand side of the chair as its pivot point, but for the evenly it's using the center. And what we want to do is force it to use the same pivot point irrespective of which input slot it's in, so that the spacing is equal. So we can do that by just closing down to alignment X and just changing it here to left. And now you see it's perfectly equally spaced. And close the style editor now. Come back out so we can see the whole stadium. And before I do anything else, I'm going to make sure I change the display to points cloud. Come up to base objects, click on spline and pick the seat spline from the scene, lower stands. Now you may get a warning saying it's the maximum number of segments has been reached. If that's the case, okay. Come into the display rollout. Come down to segments and we'll just make this 200,000. Which should be more than enough. So in this short video we've demonstrated RailClone's ability to use an unlimited number of generators inside a single style to create complex geometry. We also looked at pivot alignment and the mirror operator. In the next tutorial we'll add an audience and flags to the stadium and explore a range of randomization techniques. Meanwhile, for more training on RailClone 2, please visit our tutorials page, our Vimeo and YouTube channels, or follow us on Facebook and Twitter.